What is going on, miners, and welcome back to the Hobbyist Miner channel. I am your host, the Hobbyist Miner, joined today by two of the elite here. We do have Daniel Keller from the Flux team, as well as Joseph Armeanio from the ERGO team. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, man. Really do appreciate it. And I got to say, your graphics at the beginning of this, the lead in, it's up there with Flux's. That's pretty impressive. I felt like we were being assimilated into the Borg there for a minute.
Oh, yeah, that's an awesome YouTube premiere. I love it. I love it. So huge shout out to the live stream, by the way. Thank you guys for coming out and joining us today for a fun AMA hanging out. It's going to be some great casual conversations. I front loaded the conversation with lots of questions from you guys from the community, put them all together, bundle them up, and then we're going to be hanging out here with Joseph and Daniel and chatting away on them. So you two ready to dive in?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.
All right. So let's do our little icebreaker here for our audience that really don't know you guys. So I'm going to start out here with Joseph. If you want to kind of give your running title, at least at this time, and kind of what is the day-to-day that you handle over on the ERGO team?
Sure. So I am a member of the ERGO Foundation. The ERGO Foundation is a small group of developers that maintains the core protocol of the ERGO platform. My day-to-day, many times I'm a kind of a bridge where, we have an open source community, and I've told everyone, out there that builds on ERGO, if you build open source, I'm on your team, right? Because your code is transparent. And so what I oftentimes do is I try to bridge between development teams, the core team. Sometimes I assist them in terms of marketing contacts, creating game plans, trying to understand the assumptions of what they build. And ultimately try to drive open source community development. That's kind of our core ethos at ERGO is transparency in terms of assumptions. So a lot of the time, we try to look at the space and say, okay, well, where do we get bottlenecked in terms of not understanding, the assumptions that users need to create, and how can we improve that so people actually understand the systems that they're interacting with?
Awesome. Well, thank you for everything you do, especially for the ERGO team. So Dan, over to you on the Flux side. What is your role within the Flux team?
I think Joseph and I are brother from another mother because essentially that's kind of the same thing with Flux. So I am one of the co-founders and chief strategy officer for Flux and for @𝐓𝐿. Flux is a decentralized compute network, and much like Joseph was alluding to, is the fact that we're community based. We basically have all the folks that work on the project are community based and community driven. Decentralization at our heart. What we tried to do with Flux was fix one of Satoshi Nakamoto's quandaries when he was writing the Bitcoin white paper, and that was around wasted compute resources. So we kind of parlayed that into our node infrastructure, and we love working with like-minded communities, and that's how we ended up here on this live stream today. And thank you for facilitating it.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our questions. These are open questions, so each of you can answer them. One of you can answer them. There's no real rules here. We're just hanging out, having a good time. So we'll go ahead and throw this one out there. Allow each of you guys to answer. If you're curious, is what role do GPU miners play in the Flux and/or ERGO ecosystem?
I can jump on that. I'll take that one right away. Well, miners are essential, and much like Flux and ERGO, we put our miners front and center because it's our consensus mechanism. It's our transaction validator. It's really the community that comes together. ETH is kind of turning their back on miners, which I think is a grave mistake to move toward proof of stake. So, our goal is really honestly to use miners as a sounding board and as the fundamental underpinning of the Flux project. So they're a very important piece, and our goal is to continue to keep cultivating them even through our proof of use work process, which we're moving to. So yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. Miners are the base assumption of network security and proof of work. The biggest benefit of that is it's simple. The assumptions that, users need to make in terms of the security of the network, at least on the base layer itself, is pretty transparent. So in Ergo, miners have the ability to vote, adjust block sizes, adjust fees. Ultimately they are the network. And so, in looking at, proof of work as, a consensus mechanism, the simplicity and the interaction on Ergo, in terms of like the ability to manage the network and be custodians of the network ultimately, without the intense politics that sometimes come with governance, is really a beautiful thing. When you get into politics, things tend to break down a little bit, and proof of work is actually a really beneficial mechanism of guiding the network because it's driven by incentives. So there's like a natural organic market that forms. And it also does an amazing job in terms of coin distribution, where you distribute coins fairly based on people's work and investment rather than just their net starting position.
Yeah, I think you definitely see proof of work starting to shine, especially with the past several months, looking at the exploits and proof of stake, and the basically legacy based financial system jumping in on top and saying, hey, guess what, we're DeFi. Not so much. You know what I mean? Like it's been a true testament to proof of work, and as long as it's been around, as secure as it is, I think we're seeing, the proof is in the pudding. So, you look at what's happening in the proof of work side of space, we're ramping up as fast as we can go. And I always say this, ETH gave us, and I say us, the Ergo project, Raven, other projects that are proof of work, the gift of being slow, because it's allowed us to get ourselves into, just a little bit, right? So it's allowed us to get ourselves into a position where we're ready to capitalize on, them dispatching the miners and moving to proof of stake. So I think that's been a real big deal.
Yeah, agreed. Trust me, I think from the GPU miners side of the world, both your teams are a huge blessing. I mean, we constantly hear day to day in ETH and it being the mining killer and stuff like that. And then you guys are kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, showing that like, hey, life doesn't end when Ethereum goes away. And I think that's critical. So that kind of ties in here for our next question. So what is the next evolution of proof of work, and how is Ergo and Flux helping to lead the way within the industry?
Sure, I'll take that from the Ergo side.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do in Ergo is play to the natural benefits of proof of work. And I think that the core benefit when comparing like consensus mechanisms is actually coin distribution, right? So what we've tried to do is disrupt the concept of a mining pool itself. Right now mining pools are kind of black boxes where your trust assumptions basically break down to trust me, bro. You can't really see what's happening on the back end because it's somewhat of a black box in the industry, right? And I think that transparency there is needed. So we have currently a single smart pool, but I think as the incentive to build out on Ergo increases, we'll see more development. And what that does is it puts things on chain so they're transparent. Like you as a miner can see your payout, you can see what's happening. And in building on that, we're plugging in Plasma, which is a smart contract scaling solution, which will increase the throughput of payouts. And we're marching towards creating a mechanism to where projects on top of Ergo can launch via work. So you as a miner, can essentially use your hash rate and the distribution, like let's just say fair mechanism of proof of work to actually distribute projects that are coming in on top of Ergo. Now, there's a couple of benefits to that. One of which is the network actually decentralizes over time because, when Ergo first started, whenever you bootstrap a network, it's always, kind of rough, small. And so there's a certain like incentive to get in early. We're even looking into hash rate based distribution, where, rather than looking at block rewards coming each block, why not do that based on hash rate to where the distribution becomes even more fair over time and, rewards network security. So I think that mining in and of itself the future of it is to really lean into the strengths, because there are inherent benefits to proof of work that just can't be replicated by other consensus mechanisms.
Amen.
So I don't think it's necessarily, reinvent the wheel. It's just play to the strengths and build on solid foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think although we're doing two very unique approaches to proof of work, I think we're both trying to solve that initial quandary Satoshi had, was the wasted compute resources, right? So how do we push toward a more decentralized infrastructure across the board? And your analogy of the pools is spot on. So it's a bit of a black box. And that's plagued us in legacy finance for a very long time, right? We don't know what's behind the curtain. We think, as we found out with Celsius and Three Arrows and, all these different platforms, their black box had some pretty iffy stuff behind it, right? So, having it be transparent and community-based, I think is essential. So the way that Flux looks at our miners is we actually look at them as obviously, community members, just much like Ergo. I think where we differ is we're looking more toward the proof of useful work side of the house. So we believe the next iteration of proof of work will get us to a spot where we can start to use our resources for the betterment of mankind. And I always tell everybody, in my AMAs and everywhere else, Flux wants to be carbon negative. And they say, well, how can a proof of work project be carbon negative? Well, there's a scientific equation that you put together. And if your compute resources that you have available surpasses the amount of compute resources that are required, it would keep people from going out and having to buy additional infrastructure. So let's say it's a college or something like that. They need the compute resources. Well, we can give them that part of that. So, I think we're ultimately, both projects are in on the fact that, proof of work is here to stay, no matter, how you want to fight it, how you want to slice it up. So it's our goal as technologists to iterate the next version of proof of work. So, and it sounds like you guys are on the same kind of path as we are, and that is utilizing the resources we have today, but also building emphasis around developing it in the future.
Yeah. So looking to the future, can you explain how Ergo and Flux will handle the large influx of miner refugees and hash rate from Ethereum once proof of stake finally happens? It'll eventually happen whenever they get their act together, exactly what you said. And in that regard, can you also kind of give us what the best and the worst case scenario would look like for your teams?
Sure. Go ahead. Nope.
We'll start with Joseph. Go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
Sure. So, in the Ergo team, our main focus is to build infrastructure. I wish that I could kind of give people like a sales pitch to say mine Ergo, but the reality is you can go to what to mine and you can look at profitability right now, right? So I think that ultimately our focus is to deliver technological capacity that's useful, right? That delivers value. In terms of, let's say, post-Ethereum, I think there are a lot of positives that we can learn in looking at Ethereum. They're where they are in the market for a reason. And in my opinion, probably the biggest driver of that was the initial open source development that kind of led to the blossoming of actual DeFi and, the use cases that we see. So, from like our perspective, I think following those principles and keeping that kind of at the core ethos will ultimately deliver value, because there are a ton of miners out there that, are not just infrastructure providers. They're also developers. Mm-hmm. They're also DeFi investors. They're also, they look for ways to create return based on their mining rewards. So rather than saying, okay, we're going to let ETH dominate our future and be reactionary, we're just going to try to build what we've always tried to build. And, the roadmap for that is pretty transparent. And I think that we can build DeFi better, cheaper, and more secure with better assumptions. That's kind of why Ergo exists, why extended UTXO, is, in my opinion, has a huge future in front of it. In terms of like supporting miners, that's just delivering value, which we're already working on. We have the smart pool. We're working on, swapping contracts to where miners can mine multiple assets. We're working on launching assets via work, ultimately deliver value to the miners because they are the network.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a great point there, and I'll expand on it from the Flux side of the world. You know, we have somewhat similar views in the sense that, you know, I think it's zero dark 30 when ETH goes, you know, dark, and if you call them refugee miners or whatever the scenario is, I think they're already in queue, and I'll tell you why. Is, you know, one of the metrics that I follow quite regularly is the resale market for GPUs, and although there is a dip, most people are looking between, you know, we're miners, we know how it works, right? So we're looking if I'm going to go away from mining, I'm going to unload my GPU while it's still profitable. I'm not going to wait till ETH goes to proof of stake and then all of a sudden want to sell my card. Yeah. I'm getting ready for the next iteration, and you know what I mean. So I think you're already seeing that happen. You see the hash rate increase in Flux, you see it in Ergo, you see it in Raven, you see it in these other projects. They're testing it out. You'll see these burst mining where they'll start to come on and they'll burst mine for a while, you know, dial their equipment in, come back down, go to whatever's profitable, and so on and so forth. So I think this represents a awesome paradigm shift in proof of work, because I mean, I, on the other hand, believe ETH is the perfect centralized shitcoin, for all lack of a better term. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's JP Morgan Consensus, the folks that are behind that, Infura is completely owned by them. I mean, so our goal for building that next step in proof of work is to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to do it. So, you know, I can guarantee you, both of us, you know, I can't speak for Joseph, but I can speak for Flux for sure, that we'll be ready for that. And we're already, you know, we've got, thanks to ETH, about a 2.5 year lead head start on this thing. So I think in the end, you'll find blips on the radar. You'll find some messiness as we move forward. But that's part of the fun. I mean, we all got into mining, and we all got into this because we're community members, we're technologists, and we all kind of have the same ethos. And I think this is going to represent a great shift toward more focus around proof of work and how it can build out DeFi. It can build out, you know, a decentralized compute, and all those kind of in Web3, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think the bear market has really pushed miners to start experimenting away from Ethereum, because you're, as Joseph has said, like looking at what to mine and looking at that, where it's like, okay, if people still want to mine but their profitability is in the tank, a lot of people have started to experiment. So I've seen a lot of people they at least have a few rigs here on Flux or a few rigs on Ergo, versus prior to that bear market, everything was ETH, because we were all aiming for that, you know, what's most profitable. So I think you are right, is that we're gradually seeing this build up over time as that profitability shrinks more and more as miners. Any last things to add there, Joseph, before we move on?
Yeah, sure. I think, you know, the best case scenario for Ergo right now, we are somewhat limited in terms of market access. You know, oftentimes it's a pay to play space. And we would rather spend money on development as a small team. But, you know, that's changing as the network grows. We, you know, open eyes and get a lot more attention. So I think that the best case scenario is we open up market access quite a lot right now. You know, relative to most projects, that's pretty limited. Worst case, you know, is obviously, you know, the assumptions of the network are broken by miners for everybody, right? And to some degree, I think that having lack of market access actually is a benefit for Ergo, because it makes attacks less profitable. Like, if I were going to 51% a network, I want to have the off ramps on exchanges to dump coins, and you know, we don't really have full, you know, open market access yet. So it kind of gives us a little bit of, you know, assurance or comfort that, you know, attacking us isn't going to be as profitable as it could be if we were, you know, more developed on that side.
Well, think about it. Think about it this way too, Joseph. Bitcoin didn't have a marketing team. It didn't have a PR team. It didn't have to apply to get listed on exchanges. It didn't have gatekeepers and toll booths along the way. So sometimes, and we say the exact same thing in our project, organic growth all the way. So you get a fairer distribution rate, so more people can participate. You get the attention from the people who are invested and intelligent folks. I mean, I would say the majority of miners are business people as well, because they look at it as a business model. So I think you really, honestly, you get the best of both worlds. That adoption cycle eventually comes, that bell curve, and it eventually gets to the point where you can't run under the radar anymore. Flux ran under the radar for the better half of 3.5 years. No marketing, no PR, organic growth, and then all of a sudden, overnight, we're right up there competing with ETH and you guys and others for hash rate, which is awesome. So yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think a lot of people would agree with that.
And another point to add is that if we look at the last bear market, miners did an actually great job on Ethereum supporting DeFi. If you look at DAI and trying to create an additional return on their mining investments to be profitable when markets were not so friendly to miner profitability, I would say that miners were probably a core driver of kind of the initial seed for DeFi, just in terms of covering profitability. So
yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
In a bear market, miners really do offer a lot of value.
Well, if you're a miner and you've been in this space long enough, it's counterintuitive, because I am a miner at heart, and delayed return on investment is exactly what you want. Whenever I see a bear market come, I'm like, yes, that means the net hash is going to drop. I'm going to be able to take a bigger position, with my mining rigs and so on and so forth. But the new adopters who are just getting into it for the first time, and this is their first bear snap, their first market, it seems like the end of the world. And but in reality, if they stay with it and they start to understand that this is like this is a secular process. In other words, there's cycles and ebbs and flows in every disruptive technology, and we're just through this particular cycle, but then we'll be ready for the next one. So build your positions and mine projects and invest in projects that make sense and are doing something unique, and you'll be fine in the end. That's how I feel about it. Not investment advice.
Yeah, there's a lot of miners that have told me, that have been around the block a few times, that our bull market was much longer than ever anticipated, and we should have hit that bear market significantly earlier. So now that we are there, I agree with you, Daniel. Like, now's that time to double down, or to reinvest capital in order to, in the next bull run, take advantage of it. I think that's why a lot of people now have some of their rigs on Flux and some on Ergo, because they believe that in that next run that these projects will show more value for a miner when it comes down to that. So no, great information. So talking about Ethereum proof of stake and when it goes away, GPU miners are very fearful on Ergo and Flux of being overrun with ASICs or FPGA miners. Could happen. What safeguards and steps are being taken to keep your proof of work platform resistant to this, or what kind of game plans do you guys have in mind?
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, it's always a cat and mouse game, especially when it comes to let's say technological development. You look at FPGA chips are getting bigger. Right now, in theory, you could probably build, there are a couple of chips that are probably big enough that you could build auto LECOs, but it's also hard to buy them right now. So that's kind of a relief. In Ergo, our goal is to periodically increase the mem table. That's naturally programmed in the algorithm. And in theory, miners, if they had concerns come up, could talk to the team and say, hey, can we push this? And I don't think that would be, difficult to do. And that naturally creates an incentive to not have ASICs, because, if we increase the mem table, suddenly ASICs would drop off the network, right? I think that as like the actual chipsets, increase in size and somewhat in popularity, that's gonna always be something that we kind of have to sidestep or get away from. But in terms of like how to keep that off, I think we need to look at the economic incentive involved, and also just engage the mining community. If we need to make an adjustment, we do.
Got it.
Yeah, and Flux is, from the beginning, we've always said will be GPU centric. So if they came out with an FPGA or ASIC tomorrow, we would deploy our backup algorithm that we've already kind of worked on building out just in case. Now, that's not our preference. Our preference is to get to the next version of our algo, which is going to be proof of useful work. We're hoping we have our testnet online by the end of this year, beginning of next year, and then we're moving toward proof of useful work anyway, where our ultimate goal is to allow those folks who have FPGAs or edge-based compute like Jetsons or Pis to participate in the network. And you're going to be able to do that with our Cirrus nodes. So I think there was at one point in time a ton of value to creating these FPGAs, these massive FPGAs, first in the door, you got your profit, they turned them and sold them, whoever was first in that line. And it was a very closed group who had that. I mean, everybody can remember what happened with Bitmain and all these, they were running them well before they sold them. You were getting used gear, which was crazy. But there was so much FOMO around it. But make no mistake, Flux is 100% ASIC and FPGA resistant, and we would absolutely fork in a millisecond if we knew if we could prove that they're on there. We're moving to the next iteration.
Good to know. No, that support is, I think, is critical. Now is a time where GPU miners are hesitant, and so I think hearing that and that support, I think, is huge between the two projects. So talking about GPU mining some more, the RTX 3000 series GPUs really changed the GPU mining landscape dramatically over the last few years here. How do you think the 4000 series will affect proof of work on your platforms?
That's a good question. And, I would say that as technology continues to increase, obviously we have to adjust appropriaply to that. I think the more hash, the merrier. I think the landscape changed because, now, I remember the first time I started mining, I had my 1050 Ti's or whatever they were, and I had a quadrillion of them because, that's what you had to do to really kind of run. Then you got the 1060s that came out, then the 1070s and the 1070 Ti's, which was my go-to workhorse. And you look at, and as that was happening, the footprint continued to shrink to remain competitive. And I think you're going to continue to keep doing that. But one of the things I want to mention is I think it's important as these graphics cards become more powerful. I think it's a precursor to proof of work projects being more decentralized, because now you can have a better product, one or two GPUs running in your rig under your desk that is now yielding a higher amount because it's more powerful. So, I mean, there's always a rub there. You always have to figure out that ROI. But I think it's actually a really positive thing that's going to happen, with them coming out.
Yeah, there's a couple of unknowns there. If the 400 series is in production, that means 500 series is probably in the lab, right?
Oh yeah.
And so it's hard to predict the development of technology sometimes. I know that AMD just bought Xilinx, and so there may be some GPU FPGA hybrids in the future. Who knows, right? So that's something that we always have to watch, because it's just an assumption that we can't really know. Now, one benefit I think that we will see as well that is not really fully discussed is a lot of the mining developers have really built around ETH, because that's where the value was, where if you could optimize let's say one set of GPUs or one architecture, they could deliver value and profit. Well, there's going to be a lot of mining developers that are now looking at other blockchains saying, okay, well, even older cards, how can you optimize them? If you look.
Absolutely.
So I think that we will see a shift where not only we let's say get the new series of cards out. I think that we probably will see optimizations of older cards as well, that also allow people that got in the 200 series, 300 series. AMD certainly could improve in some of these algorithms to where they just hash better, and then it becomes an efficiency gain, and you get into the ROI and cost and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I think it's huge for miners to be able to utilize their hardware longer. So hearing you have a really good point with just the fact of like everything's been built around Ethereum and then everything's kind of been second to Ethereum. But once Ethereum's removed from that equation, these miners are going to continue to want their miner fees. So they're going to want to make sure that they're supporting all these different algorithms. And with that, hopefully we see some optimizations, which would be awesome because I think most miners would love to dig up some of these rigs that they powered off because they're not efficient as well or they're not performing as well. I think that's a good avenue to go. So talking about mining, go ahead. What do you got, Dan?
I just want to add one thing in there.
Yeah,
and,
please.
I don't know if you guys are looking at it the same way we're looking at it, but one of the initiatives we have internally is for evergreen technology. So, the ability for some of those folks with 3 gig cards to participate on the network at some capacity. So, I mean, really, we don't want to see any technology that's still viable technology be shifted by the wayside. And that's why these ASICs, when they came online, it was a race for the next ASIC, right? Race. And you had this massive footprint of technology waste that was created. So our goal, at least, as we're building out some of our future tech, is taking that into consideration and looking how you can have run till death on your infrastructure. If I have a graphics card and it's a 3 gig card, I can run this thing till it just doesn't run anymore. I can utilize it with proof of use work. I can utilize it, mining these different, platforms like Ergo and Flux. So I think we as project leaders conceptually have to start changing the way that we look at technology and be more inclusive of older technology that's still very relevant, leveling the playing field for all to be able to participate in it. I think that's the key. That's a holy grail of proof of work in my book.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a certain trade-off there in terms of like memory hardness, right? But you also have, at least with extended UTXO, the ability to run off-chain infrastructure, to where even if I have a 3 gigabyte card and I can't, let's say, mine the network once the mem table increases, I can still run off-chain bots. I can still contribute to the decentralization of things that are actually built on top of the network.
Yes.
You provide the same, distributed security assumptions without being like the base consensus mechanism, but nonetheless is important. We have an industry where like that base security is there's a hyper focus on it, right? And then we get into like bridges and it's like, okay, it was a 2 of 5 multi-sig that got hacked, and how distributed is that? How trustless is that? It's not. So having the ability to deploy and support infrastructure, not just on base consensus, but actually on top of the network, I think can bring much greater trust assumptions and, ultimately harden the network. And so even if somebody does have, let's say smaller computing power, they still have the ability to participate and be rewarded.
Yep.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So following along the lines of mining there, as a GPU miner with Flux and Ergo, it's constantly filled with kind of hills and valleys, when it comes to your hash rate and your voltage fluctuations. They're always all over the place. Why is this, occurring with Flux and also with Ergo, and what steps can your team take to stabilize that?
I mean, ultimately, it's looking at the technology. That's really what it is. You have to look at what you're working with now currently, because we don't know what we don't know a lot of times. Something can come up down the road, like, to think of proof of useful work 2 years ago, when, the MIT students put together their kind of thesis of how proof of useful work would actually work, they couldn't put it into practice because the technology didn't exist yet. And as a matter of fact, it didn't exist till, at least on our platform, it didn't exist till our node structure went live. So,
okay.
I would say it's just being pragmatic, looking at technology as it continues to keep evolving. I mean, we're not going to change our algo until we move to proof of useful work, unless we have to. And that's just being honest with the community. It's being engaging with the community. And by the way, our best technology advocates out there are the folks that are mining. They bring you, if there's something that they find, they're going to bring it to you immediately. So I think we have to be open. We have to be willing to listen to their complaints, because you're going to hear some as we start to move to the next level. And I think it's good. I think it's going to be interesting overall.
Sure, I would say at Ergo, we came from a solo mining community that was Autolykos V1. And so we still have some technical debt that's really not optimized for pooling.
Yeah.
One of that has to do with the voting mechanism that we used in solo mining created really long epochs. That was important because if you're solo mining, your ability to hit a block is basically not as high as when you have the pooling mechanism. You kind of need a longer time frame to hit a block and cast your vote. So our epoch was 1028 blocks, right? And the goal was we have a greater amount of people that are able to vote in network changes. Well, now that we have pooling, I think that ultimately could be shortened, and that would drastically improve the retargeting mechanism for Ergo, which is currently slow. It's not really optimized for pools. So, I think that is a change that certainly I would support. I know miners, would love to have faster retargeting, so adapt to difficulty adjustments faster, and that's something that I think that we can support. I would want miner consensus in terms of, okay, well, what should we compress the epoch length to? I think that's something that needs to ultimately come from the mining community, but because that is a kind of a independent factor, it's something that we could address and without having any let's say major engineering challenges. Sometimes when you change one thing, it affects multiple systems around it, but because Ergo is modular, that's actually something that could be done pretty clean, surgical. So that's something that I would push for, and I would like to see. I've already started that discussion inside the EF, and ultimately, I think that would really optimize our, retargeting mechanism. Right now, that's kind of a, let's say, burden of the past. It served a purpose,
Sure.
but now it's no longer as efficient, and that really doesn't make sense.
Got it. So along the lines there, with electrical rates skyrocketing around the globe, GPU mining operating expenses are shutting down a lot of home crypto miners left and right. You may be seeing this. How can Flux and Ergo evolve proof of work to minimize expenses and optimize for the future with efficiency?
Well, I can go. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
That's a hard question because the costs of electricity hit everything, right? The cost of energy hit everything. It's not just localized to GPU miners. I would say most industry, is affected in some way because ultimately energy, oil, powers the global economy, and so that operating cost is not really unique to our specific industry, although it certainly affects miners. I think that for us, Autolykos runs relatively cool, so you generally save on some of the infrastructure costs, but it's ultimately for the market to adapt rather than us trying to be the hand of the market in a global economy where we just don't have the reach, right? To some degree, everybody that's an economic participant in a global economy is going to have to ride the macro waves of what comes and goes. So I think that's beyond our ability to really address, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, and I think there are things that we can do around education of the folks that are miners, because I would say the majority of us who are old school, we've been through this. You've been in the space 10 years. You've seen the ebbs and the flows. Explaining to them what is delayed return on investment, what is doing due diligence on projects, what is checking GitHub repositories and doing all these processes to make sure that you're actually participating in an ecosystem that's going to give you value back. And I agree wholeheartedly with the statement about electric costs, and they affect everything. So one of the things that we're looking at is to basically incentivize those individuals who are deploying that compute resources above and beyond. And I think really as any lead project in the space, that's always your goal is to always optimize the folks that are with you already instead of trying to recruit new individuals. We want to optimize it as best we can for them. So I think you're going to see some creative stuff. And I think this is actually, because I noticed in the comments, somebody said that Ergo and Flux will not be the next ETH. And thank God, That's exactly what we're here for, right?
Sure.
We don't want to be the next ETH. We want to be the first Ergo, the first Flux. We want to be fixing problems and scaling appropriately, taking our miners' interests to heart, taking our node owners and our operators to heart, our community members, our DAOs, our foundations, putting emphasis on really developing the ecosystem holistically and not forced. And if you do that, and I know I'm getting on my soapbox, right? I'll pull it out and get off of it. Old man Dan rant, right? I think if we work together as communities, and the folks that come in and troll people and say you're not this or you're not that, let's just stop that. Let's work together. I mean, us coming together with Ergo today should be a testament to good projects that want to develop technology for the right reasons, community based, and I would say interchain operability is the holy grail of technology, right? Of blockchain technology, to be able to participate in multiple infrastructures. So one of the initiatives for the Flux team is we're in the due diligence process to launch Ergo as a parallel asset on Flux. We're also looking to get them added to Zelcore so that way they can have a solid multi-asset platform.
Yeah.
And really, honestly, what that is we believe in what they're doing. And if people stop buying dog coins and they start getting into the base level of technology, it's going to be better for all of us, right? So optimize it in many different ways.
Yeah, I think it's I was gonna say, I think it's really important the way that you put that with Ethereum. It's like Ethereum got us to where we are today from the proof of work mining side, and that's a blessing. But moving forward, I think everybody can agree, and I think you guys both mentioned this, of the diversification of hash rate. We don't want another ETH. Like, we would rather have that split up among multiple projects so that we're not so heavily invested into one coin and then they go to proof of stake and look what happens. It decimates the industry. So I think you guys are both correct in that statement of it would be fantastic to go from one king of proof of work in the current moment to now having multiples, so that we as GPU miners also have options, because I think options creates competition, which at the end of the day is a better product overall for everyone.
Yes.
And it also helps to balance out that ecosystem. So no, I definitely agree with you. So jumping on from there, with Flux and Ergo, what would cause GPU mining proof of work to become obsolete on your platforms? What in your eyes is kind of that kryptonite to proof of work in the current landscape?
Well, Ergo literally translates to work. So if we were to try to work off work, we would have a big problem in terms of rebranding and proof of work is our ecosystem. Why? Because the simplicity of the consensus, and you don't inherit a lot of other, let's say, complexities, right? Okay. When you get into other consensus mechanisms, oftentimes you have secondary effects that, I think to a large degree haven't even fully shown up yet in terms of, okay, you now have an inflation rate that all developers that build on your network need to compete with. That could be a problem depending on what that inflation rate is, versus proof of work is a zero rate market, right? That's huge in terms of economic benefit, because let's say I had a 8% inflation rate, right? Okay. If I'm going to build something on top of Ergo that's actually organic use driven DeFi, and I'm going to have to try to compete with an 8% return, how the hell am I going to bootstrap that from nothing? Can't happen. So then I have to get into either some token scheme or some mechanism of outcompeting whatever that base rate of the market is. And in my opinion, that's not very sustainable. Plus you have, even simple questions like, let's say I bridge an asset to a different chain, who gets the stake? Or is that going to be is that going to follow me to the other chain? How's that going to work? I have no idea. So it creates a weird market where if I can't outcompete the base rate of the protocol, there's zero use case for it, because people can armchair and get a return, right? But if I can actually outcompete the return of the market, guess what? Now all of those coins are going to move into DeFi and they're no longer participating in security, which creates a really weird, incentive to build organic returns in terms of actual financial products on top of these ecosystems. I'm just curious to see how it'll develop. I think the zero rate market of proof of work is one of the greatest hidden benefits in terms of actual organic use-driven returns in DeFi versus, you know, some of the schemes that we've seen lately.
Well, I think you're hitting it spot on. And the other thing I would add to that is if you really sit down and you look at what the threats to proof of work are, it's regulation, right? So it's proof of stake and basically centralization. Proof of stake is masquerading as being decentralized when we all know, everybody on this AMA knows that couldn't be further from the truth, right?
Yeah.
We've seen this with, you know, Luna, we've seen it with ETH, we've seen it with all these different platforms. So I think if they could have took down proof of work, they would have done it by now. And ultimately, I think the technology continues to keep iterating on top of proof of work. So I see, you know, proof of use of work, or is what Ergo is doing with some of the pieces that they're doing. They're augmenting the technology. So I believe the word obsolete is harsh. I think you always have to be ready for the next version of technology, which we are. Yeah, and we just pivot, right? We pivot. We say, what does this look like? I mean, we saw this when, you know, Zell went to Flux. We pivoted. We said, this fork of a fork of a fork just doesn't work for us. We need real value in the platform, and that's where we pivoted to Flux, and that's how Flux was born. So I think you're going to see the same scenario. You know, if something comes on the radar that is what we believe is decentralized, secure, you know, scalable, you can develop on top of it or with it. I think you'll see every technology start to move toward that. We're hopeful to capture some of that with proof of use of work, but I think that's just a microcosm of what's coming down in the future.
Yeah, you know, I thought these systems were supposed to be to eliminate control from third parties.
Yeah.
Like every once in a while, you're like, oh, the regulators are coming, or oh, this is happening. And I really have to wonder what happened to crypto. Like what happened to the idea of being, you know, kind of unstoppable decentralized networks versus being.
Well, we let greed get in the way in a lot of different ways.
True.
So, you know, maximum rate of return, maximum gains, people running out to buy the newest minted, you know, shitcoin that, you know, has a dog on front of it. If you're doing that stuff, then you're not here for the right reasons. But the core fundamental underpinnings, the cypherpunks of the world, right? We have not changed. Our ethos is exactly the same. And if you look at projects that are building out a decentralized platform, and you can't have it all today. You know, people come in and say, well, this part is centralized or this is centralized. Well, yeah, but guess what? We had to build it. When we were putting together this platform, right, we had to use two-factor authentication. Did we want to use Google? No, we had to spend 6 months developing decentralized two-factor authentication. So it's iterative, disruptive technology. And if everybody gets to the point where we're tired of looking at these projects that are essentially just trying to take your asset, you know, they mint, like, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but they mint a ton of this dog coin, and people are spending Bitcoin and fiat and Flux and Ergo to acquire what they've minted out of the thin air, right? So they're basically taking your assets from you. That's what they're doing. They're taking your assets of real projects and they're giving you a shitcoin. So I think we just need education too.
I think GPU mining is really a sweet spot because there's enough hardware that exists in the world that how do you stop personal computing, right?
Can't.
You know, we've even seen this, you know, I can use the Ergo community in China. They said, oh, we're going to ban mining. And it's true. If you're centralized and you have a large footprint, you're pretty easy to find and eliminate, right? But if you're a guy that's running 6 GPUs, you know, and is mining through a VPN, good luck. Good luck finding all of the people and shutting them down.
Joseph, you know who the #1 Bitcoin miner, which country is the largest #1 Bitcoin miner?
I think right now it's us, the
US. It's the United States. Do you know who #2 is?
Who's #2? China?
China. So how did that work out for you guys? Were you able to ban it because you just shifted from #1? And by the way, it gave up a lot of the gains that they had in China to be able to shift that back, you know, to the States, and the States capitalized on it. And I think you're going to continue to keep seeing that. They're going to run with it. I really, unless we get some kind of weird, wonky regulation that ends up, you know, creating a hurdle that we have to get over. I had somebody on a project was mad at the community because they were talking about their tokenomics, right? They were saying, hey, this is, a little scammy. These tokens are like 90% to VC, yada, yada, yada. This person reached out to me and said that they were going to sue the project, and they were going to give us a cease and desist order. And I said, where are you going to send that?
Yeah.
Where are you going to send that? Because I'd love to know, because this is when you have a community project like that, it's impossible to stop it. And I think that, that is a true testament to proof of work. Number one, the US, number two, China. China was number one. Now they're number two. And the US has just went like gangbusters.
Yeah,
well, the very concept that you can regulate personal computing power, in my opinion, is extremely dangerous and totalitarian.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah, it's true. I think a lot of it comes down to education, as you spoke about. Like, especially in China, it was feared. So it was like, all right, great, we're going to go ahead and eliminate it, and then that originally did spark up in the US for a small period of time, until a lot of, Congress people got educated and started to learn a lot about this. So yeah, it definitely is going to be interesting moving forward. I think education is key. I mean, people just negatively go to mainstream media and assume that it's, terrible for the environment. And here's why, and here's all the reasons. So we might as well get rid of it, not really educating themselves on it, especially with proof of work, as you had spoke about. So you guys both talked about two items that I wanted to kind of rehash on. One was your smart pools with Ergo, and then on the flip side, we talked about with parallel assets with Flux. So what are some, for the audience, what are some of the similarities and differences between smart pools and then also with parallel assets that would be of value for the live community?
Sure. Smart pooling allows you to participate in the actual consensus of Ergo and choose your reward. So if you were to, let's say we have a lot of people from ETH that are here. If you were to look at major projects that launched on ETH, what if their actual distribution was, it used the power of proof of work for coin distribution and actually rewarded miners for securing the network that their infrastructure ran on? So our goal is to have a variety of projects that are building on top of Ergo that allow miners to essentially be the initial coin distribution mechanism. So they launch via work. It's almost like launching a blockchain project the same way that a blockchain launches. Now we are building out automated swapping and portfolio management to where, in theory, let's say you mined asset A and you wanted to swap it for asset B, C, D, E. That can be done with open source technology for a very low fee. And one thing that we're currently working on implementing is Babel fees, which allows any asset on Ergo to essentially use a swapping mechanism and become the actual transaction fee versus having to buy ERG separately and then switch it and then use that. That can be automated in extended UTXO. So ideally, what we could find in the future is people mining their portfolio, whatever options they want to set.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, doing a little due diligence before our call here, I got into the smart hole rabbit hole. Right, went down there. The smart and honestly, it's smart pool, not smart hole. So and I loved what I saw. And I think ultimately we're doing something similar with our parallel assets as well, where we're allowing people to move to additional chains. So you have the primary chain. I often explain it as like dual citizenship. So you have a U.S. citizenship and you have a Canadian citizenship. When you're in the U.S., you get the full effects of being a U.S. resident, all the trappings that come with it. If you leave the U.S. and now you're in Canada, you're getting everything that comes with Canada and what they're giving you. And ultimately, what we've done is that's our play toward interchain operability. So you can be in Flux, you can mine Flux, you can also be incentivized and rewarded in parallel assets. So we have Kadena, we've got ETH, we've got Binance Smart Chain, we've got all of our parallel assets, right? They just totally just jumped out of my mind. But the good part about it is you can participate in those ecosystems while still being part of the Flux ecosystem overall. So it's really exciting for folks who in the past, they were sitting watching a project develop. So let's say it's the Kadena ecosystem, or even the Ergo, because it's one we're looking at a PA on. And they said, boy, I really like to participate in that ecosystem over there, but I'm kind of over here. So I either have to sell a portion of my bags and go over there to participate in their ecosystem, or I just miss out. Well, now the opportunity is to not only mine into Flux, but you're able to mine into these parallel assets as well and participate in their ecosystem. So, I think it's a push toward good developed projects all working toward the next iteration and being more inclusive for their end users, keeping them in one place and letting them tap into that interchain operability.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think both the projects have value to it. I mean, as GPU miners and looking at proof of work, it's like having those options, I think, is critical. You guys are taking multiple steps away from what exists today. As Joseph had talked about, like, you want to get into these other projects, same thing with Flux. Like, oh, now you got to take additional steps. You have to cash them out here and there. It's like that allows you to kind of participate and build your portfolio directly. So talking about that in your portfolio, the availability of Liquidate, Ergo, and Flux is critical to easily transition away from Ethereum when proof of stake occurs, to help really cover mining operating costs. It's the nature of the beast. Any plans to expand the number of crypto exchanges where Ergo and Flux are traded and exist? And what are the potential roadblocks that your team has run into today that many may not realize?
Sure. Go for it, Dan.
I was going to say, Joseph, I don't know if I speak for you, but being part of a project, the absolute worst part of being part of a project is dealing with exchanges.
Absolutely.
Centralized exchanges are the bane of our existence, right? Because, I'll let you go ahead. You can continue.
Sure. Ergo is already integrating in one exchange. We're in conversations with multiple exchanges. The reality is we came out of a market where anything with money in a heartbeat kind of could get listed. And unfortunately, what happens in centralized exchanges is they have a tendency to want to list native assets because they have a cookbook and the turnover rate is very high. So, if I can list an ERC20 in 2 days and I can, essentially collect the same listing costs as integrating a mainnet, there's a lot of incentive to do that. And so for a while, that was simply the more profitable play for most exchanges. The problem was they weren't, the due diligence wasn't really there for a lot of the listings, and so as a result, their users probably, didn't do too well for the most part. And so what happens in a bear market? People say, hey, how many tokens existed that never built anything? That really never had a development, that maybe they forked the GitHub and, had a fancy website or something. But in terms of the actual technology, there was nothing there. Well, now we're kind of in the other side where people look around and they realize, wait a second, how many of these projects actually delivered anything other than air. And so right now it's actually a better time for Ergo to start, talking to exchanges and, opening up the conversation, because all of that fresh liquidity is no longer around. And now exchanges are saying, okay, well, what actually has viability rather than, can just pat our pockets. But yeah, exchanges are always the most frustrating point in our space, because in my opinion, they really fail miserably in terms of pushing the adoption of this technology and actually supporting users to buy assets that are, let's say, have sustainable value and some technological use versus are shiny.
Yeah, not only that, the fact that, these centralized exchanges, this is our fracture point for decentralization, right? So, if we run around preaching and evangelizing about decentralization and building a community-based project, and then our goals are to be listed on an exchange so they can just churn you through retail, that's counterintuitive. So, I would say, as we continue to develop out, I think you're right on the money. I think it's going to happen differently. Okay. I think regulatory compliance is going to push a majority of these assets, these token-based assets that are ICOs or have been securities, unregulated securities, to be removed from exchanges. I truly believe that. And what happens the day that 97% of the assets fall off of Coinbase? Well, proof of work looks pretty damn good, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So,
yep.
What would it happen overnight like that? No, it wouldn't. But if you don't believe it's not happening, look at what's happening with the security-based coins in some of the exchanges. They're already, I mean, they won't even touch you if you're a security-based platform. It is what it is. I think they'll start to understand you'd have to have a privacy. You have to have cash to the big fiat system, and I think they'll eventually get that. But yeah, I think it's one of the, honestly, the bane of our existence. So I want to get to a point in time where people don't ask, when Binance, when Coinbase, when KuCoin. I think they just want to ask, when blockchain, right? So if DeFi delivers the promise, truly decentralized, truly functional, decentralized finance, then all of this is irrelevant. Centralized exchanges mean nothing. So that's the way I feel. I think we should all be working toward that goal.
Yeah. So we're going to take one more question, and then we'll kind of open up to chat, allow you guys to kind of pick and choose some questions to answer. We'll limit it to 2 or 3 just to respect everyone's time. So chat, if you're interested, you guys can start to post some questions up. If you want to at me or just post in the chat is fine. I'm going to allow these guys to kind of pick and choose the poison from chat or the good ones from chat. But our last question here in this setup is, proof of work over the last 3 years has helped skyrocket GPU mining tremendously. What do you feel is needed in the proof of work ecosystem to really catapult us to the next version of proof of work? You guys both have talked about it where it's like, it's really the next version. So what do you think is needed to really get us to that next version, or are we already there?
Go ahead. Go.
I think proof of work ultimately breaks down to incentives, right? Then it's a matter of saying, okay, well, how can we evolve the technology to deliver incentives to miners that make sense, are organic, and are sustainable, right? And so on Ergo, our general thinking is you don't rebuild something that's not broken, right? We just look at what are the strengths of proof of work, and we build around those strengths because you can't replicate them in other consensus mechanisms.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think we're in a very unique time. I think and pull my soapbox back out again for a minute. I think if you're in the space right now and you're sitting listening to this, or you're participating in one of these platforms, you're very early in that. If we were in a baseball game, we wouldn't even be at the stadium yet. And I think that this is probably a very unique time because as ETH moves to proof of stake, it's really going to showcase the projects that really make sense and matter. Will there be some dark horse that comes out of the middle of nowhere to try to capture it, whether it's the I didn't even know if it still existed or not, but Ethereum Classic or some of these other players. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. What does it matter? You know what I mean? Because in the end, if your mission is to build a successful project, the byproduct of building a successful product is additional resources, hash, value add, the whole 9 yards. So I think we are at the most pivotal time ever in the history of proof of work, and it's right now. It's happening right now today. For the next 4 or 5 months, as we get ready for this is where the rubber meets the road. You should be building something. You should be helping your team and your community. You should be out there making a difference because this is it. Like, I truly believe that.
Awesome. Well, guys, appreciate it. We're going to open up 2 or 3 questions from chat real quick, and then we'll wrap up here. Is there any that you guys spotted during our hour period that you're like, oh, I'd love to rehash on that? Or is there any that you're starting to see that comes in? Once again, chat, feel free to post them up. We will not get to all of them, I'm telling you 100%. That's why you can hit these guys up on social media. You can hit them up on Twitter. They're always very receptive to answering questions. And so that's probably the best place. But I'll throw it over to you guys. Is there anything that stands out that you guys want to recap on or talk more about from chat?
I've been watching Zoom, so I don't know. They're out there, but throw any of them my way. I'm fine to discuss whatever.
There was one in there about would there be any intention for Flux to use the same algorithm as Ergo? It's one of those things. We're kind of unique in the way that we approach these things, which is good because Ergo is a yin to the yang. You know what I mean? Like if you're heavy into AMD cards and, you know, maybe we're team green, your team red, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can't make a commitment not to this, like eventually looking as the technology evolves, then the communities will come together and they'll start to dictate part of that. So, you know, is there some magical algorithm out there that fixes all of this and starts to bring these chains together in kind of like one, you know, one community? I think there is, and I think you're going to see it continue to keep growing toward that in the long run. But short term, it wouldn't make sense for either one of us to do that.
Here's one here for Joseph for you. The term decentralization, this is from CW. The term decentralization is thrown around a lot in the industry. What does that truly mean for the industry? And I think this is a great term to really talk about, especially with all of the drama that's occurred recently.
You know, it's often a marketing term that doesn't mean anything. That's the reality. What does it mean? In my opinion, it breaks down to open source code and local compute. Like decentralization is collective localization. And, you know, if we look at Bitcoin when it first started, why was it unstoppable? Because you had a distributed network of nodes across the world that all had, you know, the code that could reseed the network. So it became unstoppable. You know, and I think that not only for blockchains themselves, but for something to be a decentralized application, I need open source code and I need to be able to run it locally on my computer without needing any other infrastructure provider or help from anyone else to be able to participate, because that's how you become unstoppable.
Yeah. And you've got to have a commitment to decentralization too. It has to be in your ethos, the core of the project. And as I kind of stated earlier, you know, not everything is decentralized day one, because a lot of these things have to be created. They don't exist yet. That's why it's disruptive technology. So, you know, I think if it's in your ethos and it permeates your community, then I believe that that's decentralization. And you push everything you do pushes you to the next level to be more decentralized. I mean, I always say this: if Dan gets hit by a bus tomorrow, Flux goes on. Right? Why is that? Because we have a decentralized community. It's the next man up, right? And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, we've moved towards blockchain services, is what I will call them, where the code is not transparent. You can't run it locally. You have to use other people's infrastructure. And ultimately that creates choke points.
Yep. Amen.
And that's a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a lot of, as we talked about earlier, a lot comes down to that education where, you know, all of a sudden, for some reason, unfortunately, the lack of educated have kind of put together crypto and blockchain into one category. And unfortunately, the downside is then all this drama occurs and mainstream media catches onto it and see all these people lost this money and blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, wait, you're not talking about decentralized blockchains and crypto. You're talking about these projects that did it wrong, and that's why all these people suffered. So I agree with you, and I think that's definitely one of the challenges.
They built essentially legacy-based infrastructure under the guise of decentralization. I mean, you know, Celsius, 3 Arrows, all these other players who were talking about. There's a reason why when we offered to run, you know, validator nodes for, say, Solana, we were turned down immediately. Why? Because they want to control the node network. So it is what it is, man. I call it the way it is. If you're really talking, you want to be decentralized, then put up or shut up, because either the technology is going to work and you're incorporating that as your ethos, or you're not. You can still be Web 2. You can still be legacy infrastructure.
It's sad that there's not a clear distinction between decentralized applications and blockchain services. Yeah, I wish that there was very clear, you know, understanding of the difference. And ultimately, in my opinion, it comes down to local compute. If I can run the front end, the back end locally, and I don't need another party, that's decentralized.
Yep. No, you're right. Absolutely right. So a lot of people are asking about the parallel asset between Flux and Ergo. Dan, you've spoken to it. It's something that you guys have your crosshairs on. Let's help out chat a little bit. Any timeline on that? Next 6 months, the next 12 months? What can you give us, if anything?
Well, oh man, guys are going to shoot me. You always do this. I would say this. Our goal was to have a snapshot at the beginning of the year, which we did, and Avalanche and Cosmos are going to be those two assets. Ergo would be under consideration for the next snapshot this year. So,
Fantastic.
we still want to see 2 more chains added into our parallel assets. And I will tell you this, my commitment is 110% to make sure that at least one of them, if not both, are proof of work projects.
Awesome. That's huge. Yeah, definitely fantastic to hear that. That'll put some of the chat at bay a little bit there. So thank you, Dan. Is there any more questions that you guys saw or topics that you saw that you wanted to recap on? What do you got?
I got one for Joseph. Joseph, when smart pools on Flux?
When smart pools on Flux? I don't know. I'd have to talk to the team.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. It's a perfect use case. Love the idea.
That's something I'd have to talk to the team. That's one of the downsides of actually being decentralized is I have no power. I could certainly I could certainly introduce you to the team and see what would be needed in order to spin that up. But
sounds like we're gonna have a blockchain party. Let's do it.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, directly, that's I have no power there, but that's the beauty of a decentralized ecosystem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to end things off. I think most of the community is excited to see this kind of proof of work partnership developing. And so I'm gonna act as the bridge to kind of nudge you two closer together here, which should work out nicely. Not only for the parallel asset, people are eager and interested in Zelcore carrying Ergo. I think there's a lot that you guys can do together moving forward that I think the GPU and proof of work mining community is interested in. So we're gonna go ahead and close things out there. Before we do, I do want to allow you guys, if people have more questions about Flux, more questions about Ergo, I'll throw it to you first, Joseph. Where could people go ahead and find some of those answers or ask some of those questions?
Sure, we have a pretty good community that can usually handle that. Reddit is pretty popular. Telegram's pretty popular. Twitter, I don't always like the space limits of Twitter, if I'm honest.
Or the fact that you can't change the spelling if you spell.
Yeah, that's painful.
Come on, Elon, change that up for us. Let's go.
Yeah.
We also have weekly AMAs on YouTube where we engage with the community and try to answer people's questions. But there's a lot of resources out there, and the reality is sometimes the community itself is actually better at conceptualizing and explaining things to new users than even I am. So the community is a huge resource in that.
Awesome. And Dan, what about your side for Flux?
Yep, we've got a great community as well. They love to be involved. They love to participate. You can follow us on Twitter at @RunOnFlux. You can follow me for the rantings of a madman at @DAK_Flux. Check us out at runonflux.io. You can see the projects we're working with and developing and what's running. We also have our dashboard, which you can see what's running on our nodes, our node infrastructure. Yeah, and I agree with Joseph. Just, our community is a very well-versed, educated community. As a community starts to grow in age, something that's 4.5 years old, the majority of the folks that were there from day one are still there, and they're very educated. And they often answer the questions before that ever gets to me. So I usually get the complaints. So I'm the complaint department, and all the fun stuff gets taken care of by the community.
Awesome. Well, guys, I appreciate you guys joining me today from the entire community. Thanks again for being so transparent, opening yourselves up, answering a lot of these questions, especially around proof of work. Hopefully this isn't the last time that the three of us can get together here. But thank you guys in chat for joining us. From myself, from Dan and Joseph, take care.
Thank you, guys.
It's a pleasure.